right, let's dive right in. We are going to tackle one of the absolute giants of Indian constitutional law, the Basic Structure Doctrine. Think of this as your master blueprint for acing this topic, understanding that constant push and pull between Parliament's power to change the Constitution and the parts of it that, well, they can't be changed. So, to really get this, we have to start with the big question, the one that really shaped the first few decades of the Indian Republic. Just how far can Parliament go? I mean, can it amend anything? Could it, theoretically, just rewrite the whole thing from scratch? Well, the Supreme Court's answer to that was a very firm, very clear no. And it's all thanks to this brilliant judicial principle, the Basic Structure Doctrine. You know, the idea is actually pretty simple but so powerful. It's like this. You can renovate your house, you can knock down a few walls, but you can't touch the foundation. Parliament can amend the Constitution, sure, but it absolutely cannot destroy its fundamental soul. But listen, a doctrine this important doesn't just appear out of thin air. Oh no, it was literally forged in the fire of a decades-long constitutional tug-of-war between the Parliament and the Supreme Court. And this timeline right here, it maps out that whole escalating conflict. At its heart was a huge clash between two articles. On one side, you had Article 13, protecting our fundamental rights, those core liberties we all have. On the other, Article 368, which gives Parliament the power to amend. At first, in this Shankari Prasad case back in '51, the court said, yup, Article 368 wins. But then, boom, 1967, the Golaknath case does a complete 180 and says fundamental rights can't be touched. So what does Parliament do? It hits back hard with the 24th Amendment, trying to give itself the ultimate power. So this intense back and forth, this power struggle, it set the stage for what is probably the single most important case in India's entire constitutional history. To settle this massive question once and for all, the Supreme Court in 1973 put together its largest bench ever. We're talking 13 judges sitting to hear this case. And the decision, it came down to the absolute slimmest of margins, a razor-thin 7-6 majority. That one vote changed Indian constitutional law forever. And here's what they came up with. In this landmark Kesavananda Bharati case, the court pulled off a stroke of pure judicial genius. It kind of gave Parliament a win, saying, okay, you were right about the 24th Amendment. You can amend fundamental rights. But, and you have to hear this part, it dropped the ultimate bombshell. That power to amend does not mean you can alter the basic structure of the Constitution. Game changer. So the doctrine was born. But its fight for survival was far from over. It was immediately challenged by a very powerful government. The battle was definitely not over yet. And that pushback came fast. In '75, the court used the doctrine for the first time in the Indira Nehru Gandhi case. The government's response? The massive 42nd Amendment, which tried to make Parliament's power absolute, totally beyond any court's review. But the judiciary didn't back down. In the Minerval Mills and Waman Rao cases, the Supreme Court struck those parts down, cementing the doctrine's supremacy once and for all. Okay, so after all that drama, what does this doctrine actually look like now? How does it really work as the guardian of our Constitution? Well, the Supreme Court has been pretty clever about this. It has never given us a complete final list of what's in the basic structure. Instead, the idea has grown over time through different judgments. But we can group the elements into three big pillars. First, the basic nature of the Indian state itself. You know, things like sovereignty and secularism. Second, core ideas of rights and justice. And third, that crucial balance of power between the different institutions. So in the real world, the doctrine basically works like a constitutional filter. Let's walk through it. Parliament passes an amendment. It becomes law, but it can still be challenged in court. The court then runs it through this filter test. Does this amendment damage or destroy any part of that basic structure? If the answer is yes, it gets struck down. If no, it's good to go. Simple as that. And this is why this whole thing is such a big deal. It's the absolute cornerstone of our constitutional law. It preserves the Constitution's identity. It puts a limit on Parliament's power. It upholds judicial review. And maybe most importantly, it's the ultimate shield for our fundamental rights. It's what makes our Constitution both flexible enough to change with the times, but strong enough to endure. All right, now for all of you preparing for exams, I need you to lean in close.
This next slide is the ultimate summary of this entire constitutional saga. We designed it specifically for that last-minute, high-stakes revision. Here it is. This diagnostic matrix lays out everything we just talked about in one clean, simple table. You've got every key case and amendment, the core ruling, and how it changed the status of fundamental rights from amendable to immutable and finally to protected by the doctrine. Seriously, this is your one-stop shop. Screenshot this, study it, it's gold. So when you boil it all down, the real takeaway is this, and it's so important to remember. The Basic Structure Doctrine, it isn't just some legal jargon or a clever trick by judges. It's a living, breathing part of our system, designed for one reason, to preserve the very soul of the Indian Constitution. And that brings us right here. At the end of the day, the doctrine lets our Constitution be dynamic, right? It can evolve, but it stays grounded in its core principles. It's a sign of India's democratic maturity, and honestly, it's become a gold standard for constitutional law around the world. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other principles might one day be considered part of this untouchable constitutional core?